They dragged Navy SEAL sniper Lieutenant Sarah Kane through the hangar in chains, calling her a rogue who disobeyed direct orders. The military tribunal was ready to strip her of everything, until Four-Star General Morrison walked into the courtroom and did something no one expected. He sat at the defendant's table beside her, looked directly at the prosecution, and said 5 words that changed everything. "She was following my orders." From which city around the world are you watching today? If this story moves you, please subscribe to Rising Life Stories to help us share more stories of hidden heroes. But those 5 words carried the weight of the most classified operation in U.S. military history. Lieutenant Sarah Kane hadn't gone rogue. She had been operating under direct orders from General Morrison himself, conducting a mission so secret that it existed in the files of only 3 people: the President, the Secretary of Defense, and Morrison. What the prosecution didn't know was that Sarah's unauthorized shot had eliminated a terrorist leader who was 30 seconds away from detonating a nuclear device in downtown Tel Aviv. Her split-second decision to disobey her field commander and take the shot had prevented a catastrophe that would have killed 2 million civilians and triggered World War III. The military tribunal prosecuting her for insubordination had no idea they were trying to court-martial the woman who had single-handedly prevented nuclear war. And General Morrison, the architect of the operation and the only person with authority to reveal the truth, was about to blow the highest classification in military history to save the career and life of the most important sniper in American history. Naval Station Norfolk's Military Justice Center had witnessed countless tribunals, but few carried the gravity and public attention focused on Lieutenant Sarah Kane's court-martial. The Navy's first female SEAL sniper sat at the defendant's table in dress-white uniform, her hands folded calmly, despite the weight of charges that could end her military career and result in decades of imprisonment. At 29, Sarah represented a breakthrough in special operations that had taken years to achieve. Her service record, stripped of its classified elements for the tribunal, showed exceptional marksmanship scores, successful completion of SEAL training, and 2 combat deployments that had earned her commendations for valor. But today, those achievements meant nothing against the charges she faced. Colonel James Patterson, the military prosecutor, had built his case around a simple narrative. Lieutenant Kane had disobeyed direct orders from her commanding officer during a classified operation in the Middle East, taking an unauthorized shot that had compromised mission security and potentially endangered civilian lives. The prosecution painted her as a rogue operator whose personal judgment had superseded military discipline. "Members of the tribunal," Colonel Patterson announced in his opening statement, "we are here today because Lieutenant Kane believed that her personal assessment of the tactical situation was more important than the direct orders of her commanding officer. This is not about marksmanship ability or courage. This is about the fundamental principle that military discipline requires subordinates to follow lawful orders regardless of their personal opinions." The tribunal consisted of 5 senior naval officers, all of whom had combat experience, but none of whom held the security clearances necessary to understand the true nature of Sarah's mission. They had been provided with a sanitized version of events that portrayed her actions as insubordination rather than heroism. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, Sarah's defense attorney, faced the impossible task of defending actions she wasn't authorized to fully understand. The classified nature of the operation meant that crucial evidence supporting Sarah's decision remained sealed, leaving Santos to argue based on Sarah's character and service record rather than the specific circumstances that had justified her actions. "Lieutenant Kane is being prosecuted for making a split-second decision under combat conditions," Santos argued in her opening statement. "The prosecution wants you to believe that she acted recklessly, but her service record shows a pattern of exceptional judgment and dedication to mission success. We ask that you consider the totality of her service when evaluating the charges against her." But Santos knew her arguments were inadequate without the classified context that would explain why Sarah's insubordination had actually been the most important shot in modern military history. The defense was hamstrung by security classifications that prevented them from revealing the true stakes of the mission. Sarah herself had remained largely silent throughout the pre-trial proceedings, bound by the same security oaths that prevented her from defending her actions publicly. She'd been offered plea agreements that would have reduced her charges in exchange for admitting wrongdoing, but she had refused to accept responsibility for actions she knew had been not only justified but essential. The prosecution's first witness was Commander Michael Torres, Sarah's field commander during the classified operation. Torres testified that he had given Sarah explicit orders to maintain her position and await further instructions, but that she had independently engaged a target without authorization. "I ordered Lieutenant Kane to hold her position until we could confirm the identity of all personnel in the target area," Torres testified. "She acknowledged my order, but less than a minute later, she took a shot that I had explicitly forbidden. Her actions could have compromised the entire operation." Torres's testimony was devastating because it was technically accurate. Sarah had indeed disobeyed his direct order to hold her position, but what Torres didn't know, what he wasn't authorized to know, was that Sarah had been operating under a separate set of orders that superseded his command authority. "Commander Torres," Colonel Patterson asked, "in your opinion, did Lieutenant Kane's actions demonstrate the kind of discipline and judgment required of a Navy SEAL?" "No, sir. Navy SEALs are elite operators precisely because they follow orders and trust in the chain of command. Lieutenant Kane's decision to act independently showed a fundamental failure to understand military discipline." Sarah listened to the testimony without visible emotion, understanding that Torres was testifying truthfully based on the information he had been given. The compartmentalized nature of the operation meant that he genuinely believed she had acted improperly, because he had never been informed of the broader mission parameters that justified her shot. The prosecution continued with technical witnesses who described the trajectory of Sarah's shot, the distance involved, and the precision required for the engagement. Their testimony established that Sarah was indeed an exceptional marksman, but also that her shot had been taken from a position and at a target that contradicted her field commander's instructions. As the prosecution built its case, the weight of evidence against Sarah appeared overwhelming. Every witness confirmed that she had disobeyed orders, acted independently, and taken a shot that had not been authorized by her immediate superiors. The tribunal members began to look at Sarah with expressions that suggested they had already reached their verdict. The second day of testimony focused on the technical aspects of Sarah's unauthorized shot and its alleged consequences. The prosecution presented evidence suggesting that her actions had compromised operational security and potentially endangered other team members operating in the area. Major Lisa Rodriguez, an intelligence analyst, testified about the rules of engagement that had governed the mission. Lieutenant Kane was explicitly briefed that all engagements required positive identification and authorization from the Tactical Operations Center, Rodriguez explained. Her decision to fire without proper authorization violated multiple protocols designed to prevent civilian casualties and maintain operational security. The prosecution's case was methodical and damaging. They established that Sarah had been in radio contact with her commanders, that she had received explicit instructions to hold her position, and that her shot had been taken within seconds of receiving those orders. From a military discipline perspective, her actions appeared indefensible. But Lieutenant Commander Santos began to identify inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative during her cross-examinations. "Major Rodriguez," Santos asked, "is it possible that Lieutenant Kane was operating under additional orders that you weren't briefed on?" "Objection," Colonel Patterson interrupted. "The defense is asking the witness to speculate about classified information that isn't relevant to these proceedings." "Sustained," ruled Captain Jennifer Hayes, the tribunal president. "The defense will limit questions to information that has been properly declassified for these proceedings." Santos's attempts to explore the broader context of Sarah's mission were repeatedly blocked by security classifications. Every line of questioning that might have revealed the true nature of the operation was ruled inadmissible, leaving Santos unable to present a coherent defense. The prosecution's most damaging evidence came from surveillance footage that showed the immediate aftermath of Sarah's shot. The video, sanitized to remove classified details, showed what appeared to be confusion and chaos among the operations personnel, suggesting that Sarah's unauthorized action had disrupted carefully planned tactical movements. As you can see from this footage, Colonel Patterson explained to the tribunal, Lieutenant Kane's shot created immediate complications for other team members. Her decision to act independently forced other operators to modify their positions and potentially expose them to additional risk. What the tribunal couldn't see, what had been edited out of the surveillance footage for security reasons, was that Sarah's shot had prevented a nuclear detonation that would have killed everyone in the video and 2 million other people. The sanitized evidence made her look reckless when in reality she had been extraordinarily heroic. Sarah's own testimony was scheduled for the third day of proceedings, but her defense attorney faced the impossible task of allowing Sarah to speak without revealing classified information. Sarah would have to defend her actions while being prohibited from explaining the true stakes of her decision. Lieutenant Kane, Santos asked during direct examination, can you describe your state of mind when you took the shot that forms the basis of these charges? Sarah chose her words carefully, understanding that every answer had to navigate around classified information. Ma'am, I assessed that immediate action was necessary to prevent loss of life. I believed that delaying the shot would result in catastrophic consequences. Did you consider the orders you had received from Commander Torres? Yes, ma'am. I understood that my actions contradicted his instructions, but I believed that the tactical situation had changed in ways that required immediate response. Colonel Patterson's cross-examination was brutal. Lieutenant Kane, are you telling this tribunal that your assessment of the tactical situation was superior to that of your commanding officer and the Tactical Operations Center? No, sir. I'm saying that I had information that led me to believe immediate action was necessary. What information? Sarah hesitated, knowing that she couldn't reveal the classified intelligence that had justified her shot. Sir, I observed conditions that suggested immediate danger to civilian populations. Civilian populations that your commanding officer and the Tactical Operations Center were unaware of. Sir, I can't discuss the specific intelligence that informed my decision. Patterson's questioning made Sarah appear evasive and insubordinate. Without the ability to reveal the classified context of her actions, her responses seemed inadequate and self-serving. As the prosecution rested its case, the evidence against Sarah appeared overwhelming. She had admitted to disobeying orders, couldn't provide adequate justification for her actions, and had created what appeared to be dangerous confusion among her fellow operators. The tribunal members began their deliberations with expressions that suggested they had already reached a guilty verdict on most, if not all, of the charges against her. Lieutenant Commander Santos had exhausted her defensive options and was preparing for what appeared to be an inevitable guilty verdict when the courtroom doors opened and an unexpected figure entered the proceedings. Four-Star General Robert Morrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff, walked into the military tribunal with the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention from everyone present. General Morrison's appearance was so unexpected that Captain Hayes, the tribunal president, immediately called for a recess to understand why such a high-ranking officer was present at a lieutenant's court-martial. Morrison's 4 stars and combat decorations marked him as one of the most senior military leaders in the United States, someone whose presence at any proceeding carried enormous significance. General Morrison, Captain Hayes said, this tribunal was not informed that you would be observing these proceedings. Do you require special accommodations? Morrison's response shocked everyone in the courtroom. Instead of taking a seat in the gallery or requesting a briefing on the case, he walked directly to the defendant's table and sat down beside Lieutenant Sarah Kane. Captain Hayes, Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of 4 decades of military service, I'm not here to observe. I'm here to provide testimony that is essential to these proceedings. The prosecution table erupted in confusion. Colonel Patterson had never encountered a situation where a 4-star general appeared unannounced to testify in a court-martial, especially one involving a lieutenant accused of insubordination. General Morrison, Patterson said, with respect, this tribunal has not been briefed on your involvement in Lieutenant Kane's case. What is the nature of your testimony? Morrison looked directly at Sarah, who was staring at him with an expression of amazement and growing hope. For the first time since the proceedings began, she appeared to believe that someone might finally explain the truth about her actions. "Colonel Patterson," Morrison replied, "Lieutenant Kane was not acting independently when she took the shot that forms the basis of these charges. She was following my direct orders, issued through classified channels that superseded the authority of her field commander." The statement hit the courtroom like an explosion. Every person present understood that Morrison had just claimed responsibility for actions that were the subject of a military court-martial, but none of them understood how that was possible, given the chain of command and the evidence presented. Captain Hayes called for an immediate recess to consult with higher authorities about Morrison's unexpected testimony. But Morrison wasn't finished with his intervention. "Captain Hayes, before this tribunal continues, I need to inform you that the classification level of Lieutenant Kane's actual mission is above the security clearance of everyone present except myself. The evidence you've been presented has been sanitized to remove information that would completely exonerate Lieutenant Kane." "General Morrison," Hayes replied, "if Lieutenant Kane was operating under classified orders, why wasn't this information provided during the investigation phase of these proceedings?" "Because the operation she was involved in is classified at a level that requires direct presidential authorization to reveal. I am here today with that authorization, and I am prepared to provide testimony that will demonstrate that Lieutenant Kane is not guilty of any of the charges against her." Colonel Patterson looked stunned as he began to understand that his entire case might be based on incomplete information. "General Morrison, are you telling this tribunal that Lieutenant Kane's actions were authorized?" "I'm telling this tribunal that Lieutenant Kane's actions prevented a nuclear attack that would have killed over 2 million civilians and potentially triggered World War III. She didn't disobey orders. She followed mine." The courtroom fell completely silent as Morrison's words sank in. Sarah Kane wasn't a rogue operator who had compromised a military mission. She was a hero who had prevented a nuclear catastrophe while operating under the highest levels of classified authority. Morrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder marked with security classifications that none of the tribunal members had ever seen. "Captain Hayes, I am authorized to provide this tribunal with a complete briefing on Operation Nightfall, the classified mission during which Lieutenant Kane's actions occurred. The real question," Morrison continued, looking directly at the prosecution table, "is whether this tribunal is prepared to learn why Lieutenant Kane deserves the Medal of Honor rather than a court-martial." General Morrison's revelation transformed the military tribunal from a court-martial proceeding into a classified intelligence briefing. Security personnel cleared all unauthorized personnel from the courtroom, and the remaining tribunal members were required to sign additional security oaths before Morrison could reveal the true nature of Sarah's mission. Operation Nightfall was a joint CIA-Pentagon operation designed to prevent the theft of nuclear materials from a terrorist cell operating in Syria. Morrison began his testimony. Lieutenant Kane was embedded with the terrorist organization for 6 months, posing as a weapons specialist while gathering intelligence on their nuclear capabilities. The tribunal members listened in stunned silence as Morrison described an operation that bore no resemblance to the sanitized version they had been presented during the trial. Sarah hadn't been conducting a conventional military mission. She had been operating as a deep cover agent in one of the most dangerous counterterrorism operations in history. The target that Lieutenant Kane eliminated was Dr. Hassan Nazir, a nuclear physicist who had constructed a crude but functional nuclear device using stolen uranium. Intelligence indicated that Nazir was 30 seconds away from detonating the device in downtown Tel Aviv when Lieutenant Kane took her shot. Morrison presented satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and technical analyses that proved Sarah's target had been in the final stages of arming a nuclear weapon. Her unauthorized shot had prevented a nuclear explosion that would have killed millions and potentially triggered a nuclear response from Israel. Lieutenant Kane's field commander, Commander Torres, was not briefed on the nuclear aspect of the mission for operational security reasons. His orders to hold position were based on incomplete information. Lieutenant Kane's decision to disobey those orders and take the shot was made with full knowledge of the nuclear threat and explicit authorization from the highest levels of government. The prosecution's case collapsed completely as Morrison revealed that every piece of evidence they had presented told only a fragment of the story. Sarah's apparent insubordination was actually heroic initiative. Her disruption of team movements had been necessary to prevent nuclear catastrophe, and her refusal to accept a plea agreement had been based on her knowledge that she had done nothing wrong. "General Morrison," Captain Hayes asked, "why wasn't this information provided earlier in these proceedings?" "Because revealing Operation Nightfall required presidential authorization and coordination with Israeli intelligence services. Lieutenant Kane was prepared to accept conviction rather than compromise sources and methods that are still protecting lives around the world." Colonel Patterson looked devastated as he realized that he had been prosecuting one of America's greatest heroes based on deliberately incomplete information. "General Morrison, if Lieutenant Kane prevented a nuclear attack, why was she charged with these offenses?" "Because the compartmentalized nature of the operation meant that the investigating officers didn't have access to the classified intelligence that would have explained her actions. Lieutenant Kane's heroism had to remain secret to protect ongoing operations and intelligence sources." The tribunal's verdict was unanimous and immediate. All charges against Lieutenant Sarah Kane were dismissed with prejudice, and the court issued a formal commendation recognizing her exceptional service under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. But General Morrison's intervention had consequences that extended far beyond Sarah's individual case. The revelation of Operation Nightfall led to a comprehensive review of how classified operations were handled by military justice systems, ensuring that future heroes wouldn't face prosecution for actions they couldn't publicly defend. Colonel Patterson approached Sarah after the tribunal ended, his expression showing deep remorse for the prosecution he had conducted based on incomplete information. "Lieutenant Kane, I owe you a profound apology. I had no idea that I was prosecuting someone who had prevented a nuclear attack." Sarah's response was gracious and professional. "Colonel, you were doing your job based on the information you had available. The fault lies with a system that allowed operational security to override justice." General Morrison announced that Sarah would receive the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration, in a classified ceremony that would acknowledge her heroism while protecting the operational details that needed to remain secret. "Lieutenant Kane," Morrison said, "your actions in Tel Aviv prevented what could have been the most devastating terrorist attack in history. Your willingness to face prosecution rather than compromise ongoing operations demonstrates the highest levels of personal integrity and dedication to national security." The military justice reforms that followed Sarah's case ensured that classified operations would be handled with greater coordination between intelligence agencies and military prosecutors. No future service member would face the choice between accepting false prosecution and compromising national security. Sarah returned to active duty with the Navy SEALs, her reputation not only restored, but enhanced by the recognition of her extraordinary service. Her case became a classified legend within the special operations community, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism must remain hidden to protect the very people they serve. 2 years later, Lieutenant Sarah Kane was promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to train the next generation of Navy SEAL snipers. Her experience had taught her that true heroism sometimes requires accepting misunderstanding and criticism in order to protect others, and she passed these lessons on to her students. The nuclear device that she had prevented from detonating was eventually recovered by international authorities and dismantled, confirming that her split-second decision had indeed prevented catastrophic loss of life. Dr. Hassan Nazir's death had disrupted a terrorist network that had been planning multiple nuclear attacks worldwide. At Rising Life Stories, we believe that the greatest acts of heroism often occur in shadows, protected by classifications that prevent public recognition. Sarah Kane's story reminds us that there are warriors protecting our world whose sacrifices will never be fully known or appreciated. Where are you watching from today? If this story of hidden heroism and ultimate vindication moved you, please subscribe and share, because there are heroes serving in classified roles whose contributions to our safety operate beyond public view, and their courage deserves our respect even when we can't know the details of their service.